In 1992 and 3, I had a studio in Philadelphia, downtown in Philadelphia. And the Pew Foundation had just established the Pew Grants, which was a grant given to artists, musicians, dancers, writers within the Philadelphia area. And all of the artists and musicians and writers and dancers were all going to, Pew gave these seminars, and they were teaching everyone how to win the grant. What kind of, how you had to write and what you had to write and what you had to say in your submission. Instead of ever going, because I was in my studio painting all the time, I wrote the word Pew real big. I have a little place where I log in every day and write down, when I get into my studio, I write down what I'm going to do every day, and the time that I log in, I sort of like log in for myself, like punching the clock. I wrote the word Pew real big right there. And so for the next few years, I thought about that while I was working every day. And I wound up submitting, for the Pew, I wound up submitting the paintings that were of the Autemps series, Life, Death, Birth, Resurrection. I wasn't very organized, and I realized it was the day to apply, and I hadn't written anything. So I actually wrote on my submission, I wrote, you know, I really hope I win this, that would be great. And I thought I have to say something about what I would do if I won, so I'll do a series of war paintings about war, because it was the early 90s and there was much turmoil in the world. And I would do it from the point of view of women and children, not of the heroic male figure. So I wrote it, and at the very bottom of it I said, you know, thanks very much for giving this award. It's a wonderful thing you're doing for the arts in the city. And I submitted it and didn't think about it again. And then I found out, you know, sometime later, a few months later, that I had won. I was the artist that had won that year, which meant I had to do the paintings. But they gave me enough money so that I could, at the time, that money lasted for 2.5 years. It helped me raise my family, and I could live without having to worry about selling anything or worry about doing any portrait commissions. At some point during that time, a few years later, I asked the woman who had been in charge of giving out the awards, I said, you know, why did you choose me? There were so many great painters in Philadelphia that were up for the awards, Sidney Goodman being one of them. I said, why did you choose me? And she said, out of everybody that submitted, you know, a lot of people were very verbose and had all of their writings about what everything meant and represented and how important it was that they should win it. When we got to your submission and you just basically said, I'd like to win and thank you so much for giving the award, your saying thanks was the thing that tipped the scales for everyone. So I think my sort of Southern charm growing up and going to Mabel Bailey's School of Charm as a kid, and the Southern etiquette was sort of really helped in that case, because I mean there were so many great painters at the time. So just by saying thank you, it really helps. I remember that. This was the second painting I think that I did in the series. Hiroshima was the first and Civil War was the second. It was a very cold winter, in the winter of 93, 94. When you look at my bio, when you look at my actual paintings, my lineup of paintings, you'll see that actually the Pew grant was such a pivotal time for me, because I was bolstered up by the confidence that it gave me. It was sort of a big boost, because objective outside people had said that the paintings were validated. And so not only did I do these big war paintings and the big war cycle, but I also did a lot of my paintings of home, with guys with you know, guns and pickup trucks and bonfires and all of that. All the paintings were done. I got another studio to do these big paintings, and the war paintings just designated just for that. So I had a studio downtown, I had a studio in Chadds Ford, and I had a studio in Swedesburg, Pennsylvania, where George Washington used to go out toward Valley Forge. And I had all these studios, and I would just go between the studios painting nonstop, you know, 16 hours a day. I was young and full of energy. So this one was, I wanted to do a painting of the different major wars. And so this was my choice for the Civil War. I wanted to do a painting of like Clara Barton, having found a soldier in the field. I chose the Battle of Nashville because it was an extremely cold winter and there was snow and ice everywhere that winter in Swedesburg, Pennsylvania. And so I saw the snow on my way to work all the time, and I wanted to just include that. So the Battle of Nashville was one of the only battles where there was snow in the Civil War, because in the Civil War, when it got too cold, everybody just went home. It's one of the reasons the Civil War lasted so long. Then they'd come back and start fighting in the spring again. So Battle of Nashville was one of the only battles in the snow. So as I was doing this painting, I was well into it. I was 3/4 the way through it, and I was so excited. I'd come into the studio every day and think, nobody's ever done anything like this before, because it was so archetypal. And then I remember the day I unlocked the door and I walk in and I'm going in the studio and I look and I think, what have I been thinking? This is a Pietà. Like, the whole thing is just a Pietà. I hadn't registered till that far into it. I'd posed the figures, I'd done all the drawings and everything. But the central figure was a self-portrait, and I was posed with Hannah, my favorite model at the time. But that white skin and white snow just didn't give the contrast the painting needed. And so one day it hit me that I could turn that self-portrait into an African-American figure, and that would give it a strong, because what draws your eye to things is the light and the dark. So often where you look at a painting is the strongest contrast is the light and the dark. And so I wanted you to look right in the center there. So I had to make that a darker figure. And then it became a Union soldier, an ex-slave, and it became about she being the antebellum. Clara Barton was this, antebellum figure who was actually helping everyone in the battlefield. These women are, and it was as if she knew him, and there was a personal relationship there. He's not like a real Christ figure. I mean, you don't see the wound, but her hand is right there where the wound would be, where Thomas would have put his fingers inside. So there's a very sort of sensitive moment there where she's touching him. It's a pastiche of sorts as well. Many of the paintings are, but I'd just spent a lot of time spending several years with Andrew Wyeth. And so you see, this looks like Kerner's Hill over here. It's actually Valley Forge. But it's like Kerner's Hill and Chad's Ford. The water looks like a frozen pond that Andrew Wyeth painted, the Brandywine Creek, with the leaves underneath it, a beautiful painting of thin ice. And then the hand, the black figure's hand is on the ice, on the cold, snowy ice, and that's from a painting, Breakup, that Andrew Wyeth did, of these two hands coming up out of the snow. So many references in the painting. I love the vapor. You can actually see her breathing. The vapor floating, mist floating out of her, away from her mouth. There's a little red line as well. There's a red line there, which just not only sets her apart from the landscape, the sky, but it becomes like a halo. I mean, literally like a little red halo, like a saint of some sort. And then the glow from above is almost like a Pentecostal plume that's sort of glowing. You can see her aura almost. When you do a painting, you try to bring everything you know and everything, all information into it, so that you're aware of every possible interpretation of what someone could interpret that painting to mean. And then you let it go. But you have to think, well, could they think that this means something? And could they think that means something? Because otherwise, if you don't, you could wind up, painting something that has real cultural meaning for someone, and you didn't even, you put a red hat on somebody, a red baseball kind of cap, it's going to mean something. So you got to know what things mean. Colors, symbols, everything. So, but as time changes, everything is context dependent. So there's a reference point which changes, and the reference point can change. And so there's a kind of understanding now of what it might mean to have a black figure as a victim figure, which when I did this, I didn't have that context at all. But now one could have that context and think of it differently. But I think that the truth is in the paint, and the truth of the intent is in the paint. And so, that's where, we've got all the nudes in art that came in the past, but now it doesn't mean that you can also now paint a white male can't necessarily paint, a nude with that same way that it was done in the whole history of art. But do we throw that whole history of art out, or do we try to put it in context of when it was done? We were trying to have it be the central thing, which I think it's going to stay there for a while. I mean, it feels like it's the thing that draws you into the space. And, it's the largest painting. So it needed a wall unto itself. I mean, these walls actually split, and do they turn or they just slide? I'm not sure. Maybe they just slide. But I think, when we built the space, we thought that it might be something where these were open sometimes, but once we hung that painting there, it's here for a while. You can't hide. The mark reveals everything. It reveals the intention of the artist, it reveals the original intent of why do it in the first place. You see a lot of work online and you think, oh, that's pretty good. But if you were to see it in person, you'd say, oh my God, that's like fake art. Like that was done for another reason. But real painting, every intentional mark on the painting is something that is like transubstantiation. You're actually putting your emotions into another medium, and that medium holds that emotion. The paintings aren't about ideas. I mean, I tell the stories like they're all anecdotal ideas. The paintings aren't about ideas. It's about an emotional response to what it feels like to be alive. So you're actually putting that feeling wherever it comes from. You know, it goes down your arm and it's tingling and it's fully alive and you're trying to get it into the paint, and the paint has no longer paint. The paint has to like transubstantiate into something else completely. And it has to become alive, and then you get it in there and you get it in the right place, more or less, and then it's like it holds that thing. It holds that feeling. And that's something that's why the paintings are a record of what it feels like to be alive, because you've actually gotten it down. And that happens when the intent is true and pure. And Dorothy L. Sayers in The Mind of the Maker talks about the difference between aesthetic goodness and moral goodness. You know, I mean, that's not taking into account whether it's about moral goodness or not. I mean, you know, it's about whether or not you feel it in the paint or not. And that's something that it's hard to teach. And I tell my students when they're painting it, it's like, yeah, you got the right color and you put it in the right place, but you know, it's like, and I say you have to have, it has to have ruach, which is a Hebrew word for like breath or life, breath of life. It's got to be in there. It's got to be in the paint. Otherwise, it's like, what are you doing and why are you doing it at all? So, and I actually tell my students sometimes, you know, you're doing all that now, you just need to blow on your brush and put your life energy into it. That's that other element. You know, you mix turpentine, you mix some liquid or medium, and then you got the paint mixed up, and it's like you're putting it down. It's like it's missing something. You know, it's missing your soul and your lifeblood and your breath, and it's got to get in there and then put it down then. You know, I have students that have said they still do that, like they blow on their brush before they put it down, because it's about getting your energy and your life energy into the paint. And, you know, you see it on the great paintings. You see it in the great paintings. You know, so you look at an Andrew Wyeth. It's like there's no reason why that should be good necessarily. I mean, sure, it's got great tonal relationships. It's got great composition. It's sort of a nice idea, but you know, it's like there's something in there. He's like putting his life into the paint, and you see it in a Rothko. You know, it's like it's a painting of color, but it's not. It's color. It's the painting of his soul. You can't hide when you actually look at the painting. You know, you know if it's real. You know if the life energy is in there or not. And so, it's got a universality, regardless of what the subject matter is or what the story is. There's universality to that feeling. And it'll be really abstract for people, but it's like I feel something.